If you've ever had this feeling that something was terribly wrong with the world that we live in, but you couldn't figure out just what it was, then you've come to the right place. Secret societies, mystery religions, and the Illuminati have been controlling our reality since the beginning of time. But not anymore, because there is an awakening happening, and you are about to become a part of it. Wake up, because this is a call for an uprising.
This is a call for an uprising. Welcome to today's show. Well, I want to show you something that's been trending all week on YouTube, and I want to explain to you why it's trending. Now, I wanted to use the video footage, but unfortunately they've blocked it. No idea how someone like this is even trending worldwide. A 25-minute video where a bunch of guys who aren't funny at all, the same stuff, right? Force fed on us. How funny. Where they do things such as lock themselves. They have one of their friends locked inside of a coffin and then covered with snakes. You can see from the photos here. They're dumping snakes on him. Ha ha ha. The snake's even biting the guy. And then he gets out, and apparently this is entertainment for people. But in reality, let me tell you and show you what this really is. Now, I have to be careful how I word this, because this is something they've cracked down on big time on YouTube, along with many of the other topics that we all talk about, including Bagelville. But this all stems from SRA, satanic ritual abuse, which they don't want you to believe is real. And unfortunately, I'd use interviews even to show you proof, along with, certain writings of people who have come forward and admitted to this being one of the techniques used on them when they were a young child to cause trauma-based mind control. Unfortunately, what has happened in the last couple years on YouTube is this whole movement of exposing these types of people and these types of groups and secret societies has become hijacked in a sense. We've had people come forward and pretend to be victims or know people who were victims, only to be running GoFundMe schemes on here, trying to raise money for themselves, all sorts of just despicable acts. And what that pretty much has done is taken serious issues, which they once had to use satanic panic as the term for, to get people off of their backs and to discredit it. Now they pretty much have all of these people on YouTube who come forward and talk about this stuff, and then they get attacked by a bunch of losers on YouTube who are clueless about what's really going on. And it's hard to find anybody that's really credible, because there are a lot of people who are making this stuff up now. However, if you study satanic ritual abuse, if you study the techniques of trauma-based mind control, it's something that I'm very well versed in through a lot of the books that I've read over the years. It's not something I recommend people study unless they have a strong stomach, unless they can handle it, because this is the type of stuff that even makes me need to take breaks for days. Really, I should take breaks for weeks after going through these documents, but I've gone through them many times over. So one of the things that they do in these covens, when one of these children that they're grooming, and then they begin using them for, unfortunately, to be involved and participate in these rituals, and then eventually as they become older, they become handlers, and that's how the vicious cycle works, is they use torture type techniques. This technique, this thing you're seeing here on YouTube trending, being shown as a comedy skit, is one of the most common techniques that they use. What this does, and events like this do, is the trauma creates splits in these people's minds. That creates alters because of the traumatic experience that they go through. They do things such as electric shock, sleep deprivation, needles that are used to inflict pain on them. They'll hang people upside down. They'll drown them and lift their head up. Kind of some of the stuff that you see in these movies, where they're like, oh, it's a war, movie about war. And then, they've got the spy from the other country. And they waterboard them and do all that kind of stuff. It's similar to that, except this is a lot sicker because this involves children. And one of the reasons you see YouTube and others promoting this type of stuff, like this didn't just get promoted. It's a 25-minute video about a bunch of different stupid comedy skits. And then they pick the last thing that they do at the 23-minute mark to promote it. They always are promoting this stuff because they're normalizing this type of stuff. Okay, they get off on this. So they use things like I said, electric shock, hypnosis. The most common thing that I've heard actual victims talk about is confinement and isolation in small places, often with sensory deprivation. So a black hole, a pit, a cage, or a coffin is used. And then inside of that coffin, they'll usually fill it with bones, a body of an animal, or even a human sometimes, snakes, and spiders. And then they use techniques and tell these young children that the worms or the snakes will eat them. And then they're left in there for days, shaking and under this abuse. I mean, this really creates splits in their personality. And these are the things, that they normalize now with, everybody, mental health disease and all this stuff. They deliberately do this to these people, to these children. And it's involved in very significant rituals. And it's a tool used to, utilize punishment. And being reborn into Satanism, when they are taken out of the coffin, it's as symbolic as if, listen, they had a death, they were saved, they were brought out of it. And this is one of the things that they commonly use along with, other things, sexual torture, physical deprivation, participation in actual, rituals that involve murder, psychiatric abuse, emotional abuse, religious and spiritual abuse where they invert everything. And they talk about how God hates them. God hates them. They say stuff like Jesus approves and believes that they're bad. That's why they're being put through this. This is the sick stuff that they do, but this is what they do. And this is why people have such a hard time wrapping their head around it because they go, well, why aren't these people who are now, 20 or so, why aren't they reaching out and trying to help them? Well, this is all they know. This is what they're told is right from wrong. They've been completely programmed like this, so they believe it. Just like people believe, that we landed on the moon, and they believe in the history of World War II and all this other stuff because it's all they've been taught. So they've been taught this reality, and then we've all been taught this other fake reality, and it's hard for them to break the control of it, and thus they become handlers because they don't feel sympathy for when they become the handler. They don't feel sympathy for doing this because they went through it themselves. So they think it's normal behavior. Using drug abuse, brainwashing, and then this whole locking in the coffin is this near-death type of experience. Involves suffocation, like I said, with, the fake drownings. Sometimes they even have to resuscitate these people using oxygen. I mean, it's really frightening stuff. But people don't believe it goes on because these types of techniques work so well that victims never come forward. For lots of reasons. And it's hard to blame them, for fear of death, for so many things, because their brain also locks off a lot of this stuff because this happens at such a young age. Like I've said before, there have been people who at 40 and 50 years old, suddenly something triggers and activates a memory of this happening to them, and then they come forward as victims. But again, this whole, movement that has occurred online, people have heard a lot of these stories, read a lot of these testimonies from people that have actually gone through this. And then they pretend that there's someone who goes through it because, they're a meth addict or something and they want money. So they come out with GoFundMes, and it takes away, the severity and the realness of this actually occurring because it does actually occur. And again, when I talk about the satanic churches and temples and stuff, there's a reason that their focus is on two things. Always preaching feminism and going against anybody who's anti-abortion, and then going after people who claim to be satanic ritual abuse victims. If they weren't real Satanists, they would just go, oh, these are crazy people, satanic ritual, who cares, right? There's a reason that they focus on that stuff, because when the cat gets out of the bag, the gig would be up for them. But unfortunately, it's not going to, even when it gets out of the bag, they use all of these psychological techniques through the media to convince people that none of this stuff occurs. So I just wanted to do a video because I saw that this was trending. obviously, in studying this stuff for a while, when I see a guy laying in a coffin with snakes on him, the first thing I think of is the stuff that I've read about and the trauma-based mind control techniques that are used. And that's the only reason that that would be trending on YouTube. To normalize that stuff, to make a mockery of it. Isn't it funny? He's in a coffin, you know? He's not even in a box. He's literally in a coffin, which is literally the actual ritual that's done because it's inside of a coffin. Because like I said, they torture them in there. They think they're gonna die. They get them as close to death by starvation and locking them in there and having a tough time breathing as possible. And then they're saved, by these Satanists. They get a second chance at life because they're born into Satanism. That's the sick world that we live in. So I wanted to point that out. Pray for these children out there who suffer and go through these things. It is real, whether dummies on here want to think that stuff's not real. They're just complete morons. Like, oh, that stuff's not real. I'm not saying that the people who come forward on here aren't frauds, because there's tons of them. But this does actually occur. All you need to do is look at all these cases that have occurred, from McMartin to Oak Hill to the West Memphis 3, and how all these these kids have come forward at such young ages where they wouldn't even be able to make this stuff up because it's unfathomable. Adults can't even fathom this, let alone a 4-year-old. And then all these people get freed from prison and walk the streets. I wonder why. It's a joke. I thank you for listening to today's show. God bless all of you and your families.